It's a chilly October evening in 2002. Over 900 people have gathered in Moscow's Dubrovka theater for a performance of the play Nordost, or Northeast. It's a sold-out showing. A little after the start of Act 2, about 45 masked men and women burst into the theater, shouting and firing assault rifles into the roof. The performance screeches to a halt as the terrorists, who identify themselves as members of an Islamic movement, block the exits and threaten the lives of everyone inside. For the next 4 days, the lives of hundreds of people are at stake, and the entire world is watching. Like so many disputes involving Russia today, it starts with a border. In 1999, a terrorist organization known as the Islamic International Peacekeeping Brigade, based in the former de facto nation of Chechnya, invaded the Russian Republic of Dagestan. What followed was a descent into the Second Chechen War, which saw Russian forces occupy Chechnya. On the night of October 23, 2002, the men and women who would attack the Dubrovka theater had this in mind. Movsar Barayev, a 23-year-old Chechen, is in charge of this militia. They arrive via bus, dressed in black and camouflage. Some of them have explosives on their chests. When they enter the theater, panic ensues, with some reports stating that dozens of theatergoers are able to escape during the commotion. But once the attackers took control, only they could decide who would leave or enter. They allow the release of a few fellow Muslims, children, those who require medical treatment, pregnant women, and a few non-Russians. The rest are stuck. A videotaped statement is released to the media saying the terrorists are not afraid to die. The attackers demand the withdrawal of all Russian forces from Chechnya in the next 7 days. After that, they said, they would begin killing all the hostages. On the morning of the second day, Russian President Vladimir Putin is aware of the situation and calls off a planned visit to the United States. The government makes an offer to the terrorists: release the hostages and we'll let you leave the country unharmed. But the attackers don't take the offer. Instead, they demand to speak with Joseph Kobzon, a member of parliament and a professional singer who had sung songs praising Chechnya in the past. Kobzon entered the building with members of the International Red Cross and left with 5 hostages. The attackers ask to speak with other prominent celebrities and politicians and end up releasing 44 hostages total on the end of the second day. But even as they were releasing hostages, the attackers were attempting to dial up the pressure. According to a representative for the theater, the terrorists had placed a large bomb in the center of the auditorium and threatened to detonate it if Russian police attempted to enter the building. That night, as terrified hostages tried to sleep, a hot water pipe burst in the ceiling overhead, flooding the ground. Later, it will be revealed that this burst pipe was opened intentionally, as a means by which to listen to what was happening inside the theater. On the third day, the extremists increased their demands. They wanted to speak with an official representative of the President of Russia. They release 15 additional hostages, perhaps as a sign of goodwill. Nikolai Patrushev, the head of the Russian FSB, which does some similar functions to the American FBI, reiterates the government's offer. Release the hostages unharmed, and your lives will be spared. Again, the offer is not accepted. Later in the day, a group of doctors is, for the first time, allowed into the theater to bring medicine and hot food for some of those being held hostage. These doctors report that most of those in the theater are doing all right, but in an interview with Movsar Barayev, the leader of the extremists, Barayev signals that the situation is about to take a turn for the worse. Quote, "We have nothing to lose. We have already covered 2,000 kilometers by coming here. There is no way back. We have come to die. Our motto is freedom and paradise. We already have freedom as we've come to Moscow. Now we want to be in paradise." At some point on October 25th, the third day, a hostage reportedly attacks one of the extremists, leading to the shooting death of both that individual and another. The deaths of the 2 hostages is the last straw. The fourth day will be the final day of what will soon become Moscow's most deadly terrorist attack. In a desperate final attempt to avoid the deaths of the remaining Russians and the further anger of occupying Russian forces in Chechnya, a Chechen politician named Ahmed Zakayev begs the terrorists not to make any rash decisions, but it's too late. At about 5 a.m., Special Forces police from the FSB surround the theater and fill it with what one unnamed officer called a combat nervous paralyzing gas. The mystery gas was pumped into the theater's vents as well as released via smoke grenades thrown onto the theater floor. Quote, "Those gunmen who were on stage started to fire at us, and we hit them," said one officer. "Then we started to deploy across the hall. There were more gunmen firing submachine guns at us from the right side of the hall, but we hit again." The theater was thrown into chaos as the extremists began firing, and the gas incapacitated those in the theater hall. Snipers executed the extremists who were strapped with explosives in order to prevent them from detonating. The terrorists instructed the hostages to lean forward in their seats with their heads down. As gas filled the room, the Russian FSB commandos waged war on the hostage takers for about an hour and a half, killing Movsar Barayev in the process. The FSB Special Operations Commandos had succeeded in incapacitating the terrorists, but the gas's effect was indiscriminate. Those who inhaled the gas lost consciousness, with dozens of them never waking up. There were no doctors on the scene, and it took those nearby upwards of 90 minutes to transfer a total of 763 hostages into city buses bound for the hospital. Doctors were told on very short notice to use the overdose medication naloxone to treat the hostages, but the hospitals did not have sufficient quantities of the drug. As a result, 132 of the hostages who the Russian federal officers were attempting to save lost their lives that day, the most deadly terrorist event in Moscow history. 17 of the dead were members of the Nord-Ost caste, 2 of which were children. 1 United States citizen was killed. To this day, the exact type of gas used by the Russian Special Forces commandos is a mystery. President Vladimir Putin hosted a televised address later that day, defending the operation and saying that the commandos had saved hundreds of lives. Russian forces in Chechnya launched renewed operations, and the Second Chechen War continued for another 7 years. In February 2003, Nord-Ost returned to the same stage it had been performed on that fateful night, but ran only 3 months before it was cancelled, reportedly because of fears that such a deadly attack would happen again.